I think we'll open up the meeting. We have no apologies, and the order of business, no change to that. We'll proceed as per the order contained in the papers. Interests, any updates to the interest register? Or any conflicts that might arise on matters relating to the agenda? Councillor Edgar.
I don't believe I have a conflict, but I do have a collegial relationship with two people, of which there is legal proceedings. One, neither of them have ever raised that they were even, until I saw the agenda, I didn't know they were a part of any council proceedings, and I don't believe that my association with them forms any conflict, but I just thought I will raise it, and in the public excluded session, I'm happy to name who they are.
Okay, thank you. I think it's appropriate to do that, so thank you. Any other conflicts of matters on the agenda? No? If there isn't, it's fine. We have public forum submission today, and call to the table the Brook Valley Community Group.
Thank you.
Welcome. I think, as you probably are aware, as a group, you've got 10 minutes.
Thank you.
To make your presentation.
Thank you.
Over to you.
Chair. Thank you very much for inviting the Brook Valley Community Group to speak today. The first point is we're all here for the same thing because we all care deeply about the Nelson community, the Nelson environment, and the people of Nelson. We've got different ways of how we think that can be achieved, but that's why it's so important to have democracy and to have those different views represented around the table, because it's only when you have all the different views on the table that we can make the best possible decisions. And we know what we know, but we don't know what we don't know. So if we don't have the views covered, we miss out on what can be really important. The second point is the Brook Valley Community Group has no money, and it's made clear throughout the proceedings that it's had no money. It's fundraised as best it could, but whether it's liquidated or not, it's got no money. The issue is whether the council should support the continued existence of the Brook Valley Community Group Incorporated, so it can represent the views of that part of Nelson in the Brook Valley. So they've got a long history, and I've given you a written submission which I hope everyone's had circulated. Great, thank you. And on the back page of that is just some quick examples of what the Brook Valley Community Group has been involved in over the years. And for most part, the Brook Valley is not an affluent part of Nelson. It's not a part where we've got directors and members liaising with the business community. It's generally a retired community, a lower socio-economic community, but a community that does care deeply about its valley and about the quality of life there for its people, and that's why the group formed. So I'm here today because the council does have a choice. It has a choice whether to try and liquidate the Brook Valley Community Group. And on the face of it, the Brook Valley Community Group admits that it can't pay the court costs. The question, though, is if this is not a trading company whose purpose is to make a profit, this is an incorporated society whose purpose is to represent the community. And because it couldn't get traction with the council in the past, it took the action of court proceedings. Its only debt is the costs arising out of those court proceedings. It has no other debts that it owes to anybody in the community, at least so far as I'm aware, and it's got I haven't seen the latest balance, but it's a balance of, $27.13 or something like that in the bank. And, it is how it is. But my submission is that because the council's duty under the Local Government Act is to represent the interests of the communities, and as a result of the amendment last year, there's a particular emphasis on wellbeing of communities under the Local Government Amendment, was it Wellbeing Amendment Act, that that must take priority over financial situation, because of course, if you can only have representation if you've got money, it means that only certain sections of our society can be represented. There's no risk to the council by letting the Brook Valley Community Group continue. It's simply an opportunity to engage with another group. The court, we as council know, we went right through the court. You may not know, the council chose to join the proceedings. The Brook Valley Community Group didn't take legal action against the council, but it did give information about those proceedings to the council, and the council chose to join the proceedings, and the Brook Valley Community Group consented to that because recognised that the council had an interest representing the community. So when the Brook Valley, when the council joined the proceedings, I mean, obviously the outcome was as it was, but the court recognised throughout the proceedings, firstly, that the Brook Valley Community Group didn't have money and gave waivers on all the filing fees and the like, and the Court of Appeal gave a discount on security for costs. It's significantly reducing security for costs in recognition that access to justice should prevail over financial affluence. And the court recognised on a number of occasions the public interest in these proceedings, both just in the interest of a community feeling that it's able to be heard and it can engage in processes, and in the actual outcome of ensuring that laws are being properly interpreted. So my request to the council, I think you've probably read the background, the background that there's a number of issues about the sanctuary and the way the decisions were made that the Brook community is not happy with, but we can't change those. Those have been done. All we can change is where we are going forwards. Does this community have an opportunity to have its representation the way it's been done in the past, or will that be squashed and they will be disengaged from the council processes? And my submission is, as a matter of law, the council's got an obligation to promote the community's future engagement, and just as a matter of equity and justice and community wellbeing, the council similarly has that obligation. So that's the crux of what I want to say. There's a lot of detail, but you know, history is as history is. We can't change that. But what we can do is show that we can be proud of our council because it listens to the views of everybody and it engages as constructively as it can, and it supports the underdogs as well as those who are the most thriving groups in community, because the community is made up of all of these different groups, and we actually do need to be able to work with all of them and engage them, because if people fall out the bottom of the system, as we all know, we get mental health issues, we get all sorts of different issues when people lose trust in the system. So the ability to engage and be heard is just so important, just for that very reason itself, irrespective of what the outcome is. Obviously, if you do engage and you are heard and you've got some good points, you hope that makes a difference as well. I have asked for two things. The first is some sort of inquiry, irrespective of the outcome of winding up the Brook community or not, or proceeding with that action. And we do have the same sort of argument before the High Court, but my submission is that it's a waste of council resources and the community's resources to go and run this before the High Court, because it's a matter where the council's got a discretion whether to proceed to seek costs and whether to proceed to wind up. So the council could, by consent, withdraw that application. And financially it would save money, because there is no money to be made out of the process. There's just a whole lot more costs for everybody. So we ask the council to withdraw that application to reflect the community interest in this. And the second thing is to have some kind of inquiry or review, because we all make mistakes. And we all look back and think, gosh, there could have been a better way of doing things. But it's so important to actually actively do that and have a good think about what we can learn from all of these processes, so that we are better prepared for the future and we don't go down the same paths in the future. So that's the second aspect, and that's independent from the financial side. So that's really the submission for the Brook Valley Community Group Incorporated in the Council's hands to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. As you know, we don't have a forum entry to debate or discussion about it here in the presentation. It's been certainly very clear to me. Does anybody have any questions or clarification at this point?
Thank you.
So
Thank you. Thank you very much all for your time, it's much appreciated, and for your efforts in making yourself available for the public, because it does take quite a toll, as we all know. Thank you.
Thank you, that would help. Sorry, I didn't have that on earlier, but I think everybody heard me. So I have a verbal report just on this, which is to welcome everybody to the first Audit and Risk meeting of the year, and indeed this triennium, I think. So a warm welcome to new members, and welcome back to returning members. For me, this committee is one of those that sort of usually works somewhat in the background of the more exciting mainstream issues and events that the Council engages with, but with a key role of supporting councillors and staff and ensuring the necessary aspects of good practice, control, compliance are happening. And as we did last term, I have no doubt we will fill our agendas this term without any difficulty, and hopefully add value to the organisation. I think it's quite appropriate today in some ways, and to what I've just said, that today we received the report from Audit New Zealand on the annual report for the 2018-19 year. And firstly, I want to commend the organisation for an unmodified and largely positive report that has come through there. I have to say I'm particularly pleased to see the suggested future focus in several areas that have been of interest to this committee in recent years, particularly those relating to capital budget underspend, and project reporting, both areas in which I have been, and this committee has been keenly interested. So I look forward to seeing some tangible progress in those areas based on the suggestions offered by Audit New Zealand in their report. There will also, and inevitably, no doubt be new matters to contend with, and indeed we currently have a significant and uncertain risk confronting us all in the form of COVID-19, or coronavirus. I expect and hope we might hear from officers during the course of this meeting about their current thinking, at least, and potential actions in that regard. So without further ado, let's get into it, and I move that my report be received. Seconded by Councillor Sanson, thank you. Any questions? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. We move to item 6 on the agenda, which is the Internal Audit Quarterly Progress Report. And welcome Ms. Anderson to the table. Hello again.
Hello.
And the normal form, I don't think things have changed to that extent. Lynn, any updates, any points that you would like to emphasise before I open up the report to question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I thought that for the benefit of the new readers to the report, I would just highlight the separation of the report. So the first page refers to internal audits, and the second part is business improvement. On the second page, it's business improvement work. And it's been separated in that way because Council agreed that some of the internal audit effort would go towards that until June this year. And I just wanted to point out that I can answer questions in relation to contract management in particular, which I've been heavily involved in. But if you have any questions relating to project management and asset management, it might be better that that we have Arlene, my manager, alongside, and she could probably answer those. I have some updates to the internal audit work that's been done subsequent to this report being finalised. So under 2019-20, the formal fraud risk assessment, a draft framework has been done, and next I'm holding interviews with key managers to further brainstorm their particular key risk areas, if there's any that I've missed. And just to highlight the fact that an output of this is to provide managers with lists of their particular areas of risks and recommended controls for self-review, and also to inform future audit plans for obviously 2020 going forward. In relation to the founders' control environment, I had understood that the point of sale system was going in there in March, but I've had a recent update on that it won't be before April and May. It's going to need to be led by finance. Had hoped that they wouldn't need to get as involved as they have. But they've got some upgrades to our accounting information system that will keep them busy, and a few other projects up until April, May, which is why that's been delayed. So we might need to look at an alternate audit to fit that slot. The two unplanned audits, which are the last two, which the first one is referred to in a report at the end of this session, and the second one, I felt quite strongly that we should try to look for ways to improve the internal audit function and to review whether data analytics, and I believe that data analytics has been used everywhere these days, and we really should try and introduce it to the organisation, and it fits alongside our policy for using data more readily than we have in the past. So far what I've done is I've researched the benefits and the barriers, and have a look at the approach that we'd need to take in order to start determining what the benefits might be for our particular organisation. So quite a bit of that work's been done already, so just giving you that, and I will take questions on any matters on that report.
Thank you. Just before you do that, for the benefit of new members, perhaps just a little, I'm not sure how much you know, but a little bit of history around the fact that a couple of years ago, when the internal audit function started, it swept through a significant number of assurance audits. I think the figure was something like 31 in pretty quick succession. That led to the situation where they were moving faster than the organisation and the manager's ability to be able to respond to the recommendations being made. Bearing in mind at the time there were considerable resource pressures within the organisation. So following a request from senior management to this committee, it was agreed that part of the internal auditor's time would in fact be devoted to business improvement. So there was a mixture of both the internal audit and the business improvement function. To give time to catch up to those outstanding recommendations, but also to be able to apply the skills to some specific and defined areas where we were looking for, the organisation was looking for some particular improvements. We agreed to that, this committee agreed to that for a period of 1 year, and then a year later extended it for another year on the basis that it seemed to be doing pretty largely what we expected. So this is why I think we referred to the fact that sort of come July this year, that will be the time to reconsider that. And I think in reconsidering it now after a 2-year period, it would be worth looking at in some detail at the exact success that has been achieved by that, what has been achieved in the business improvement area, and what has been perhaps the impact on the internal audit function, to see if we achieved the balance that was being sought. So I would like to be working with or suggesting internal audit team work on presenting us at the meeting following the July period, or leading up to the July period, as to whether or not whether A, an extension to that arrangement is sought, and B, whether or not we would agree to it. So that's just a bit of the background as to when we refer to business improvement in the context of internal audit, that's where it came from. Now, very happy to open up for questions. Mr. Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question following on from your commentary there. I completely agree. It's time to, for want of a better term, stop, pause and have a think about this. Going into 2021 year, because that would be a natural, logical place to do that. But I suppose the question is around just when that review would occur, how would it occur, and how would it be reported back, because we'll be at June pretty soon, I would anticipate, and it's certainly something that we need to be engaged with. So I was just really tabling some thoughts around, your thoughts around how that process would actually happen, because I agree it has to happen.
I think first of all, this is the first I've sort of dropped it on a number of people. So I think in the first instance it would probably be a discussion with the group general manager sitting next to me and the chief executive sitting on the other side, to make sure that this is something that we can go ahead with, and then we would look to develop what are the requirements of that, what are the expectations, what's the reporting time frame. So I would hope that we'd be able to report that back either with some substance behind it, or at least a plan to do so at the next meeting. Councillor Edgar.
Thank you, through you. So I did send through a question earlier, yesterday, just in relation to, in the business improvement chart, asset management. So it's just, under your update for Q1, it talked about project to complete an initial set of improvements relating to parks and facilities, and then for Q2 it talked about a draft report. So is that a complete draft report or a subset for parks and facilities? And if so, who is doing that review, and will this committee get to see that full report?
I'll just get Arlene Nicklick to respond to that.
Hello, through the chair. That piece of work was an internal piece of work, so it's conducted by a staff member within my team, and the work involved some research and analysis into the various asset registers that we had across the organisation, and some recommendations around that, which invariably involve some consolidation of asset registers and working on completion of gap analysis around whether we have data gaps. So it's an internal piece of work. It wasn't specifically an internal audit piece of work. Through the chair, is there a follow-up?
Are we going to get the report?
Through the chair, it wouldn't normally be a report that we would bring here. We would normally bring a response from internal audit reports for areas that are rated a high risk or above, but internal pieces of work to do some research and analysis to inform our work programme and our next steps would not normally come to subcommittee.
Right. So you, in what you've said verbally, you're talking about asset registers, and I don't recall actually seeing the word register in the brief verbiage that's here. It talks more about asset information, so some of that I anticipated to be the AMPs. Is that not the case?
Through the chair, we didn't review asset management plans as part of that work. The focus was to look at what asset registers we have that contain various information about asset groups and the configuration of those asset registers.
Okay. And just one more question on the line above then, just to do with the accounting information systems. So there was a report done maybe 4 to 6 years ago, looking at where and how TDC and NCC could enhance their service delivery, reduce rating impacts, etc., etc. One of the areas on that was combining sharing IT systems, and just wondering if that is part of this, because you're looking at IT systems here, and yeah, just wondering if that has fed in as part of this.
Through the chair, no. I think that we have varying ways that we've configured our software, and so no, it hasn't been considered in this. The software that we use is a little bit limiting in all sorts of ways, and we have to look at ways where we can manipulate the data through using an alternative source of data warehousing, really, in order to be able to get reporting and things off it. So no, we haven't thought about combining with TDC in this case.
Not 100% sure what my follow-up question is, but I guess I'll make a statement then. If our system is limiting, then I'm confused as to why we wouldn't look at, since it was highlighted as a priority, and an area where we could enhance service delivery for both councils, and if our system has limitations, then I'm not sure why we wouldn't look at what systems has TDC got that we could maybe utilise. There may be nothing that they've got that, you know, could deliver, but there may be something that they do have that we could share, use, etc. So I'm just not sure why that wouldn't be part of the review.
Thank you. Did you want to comment on that, Ms. Hudson?
So, so through the chair, this is in relation to a contract management system, and what we wanted to be able to record within our accounting system was the contract numbers that the purchase orders related to. And we weren't actually able to do that within the system, and so what we're looking to do is use a data warehouse Power BI sort of system. TDC, I'm aware, are looking to move away from Magic, the accounting system that we're using. They don't have a contract management system, and I'm waiting in anticipation to see how much money they're putting in the LTP, but I'm aware it's probably, you know, it's several million to move away from their accounting system. So they're in that process of going through that assessment, but they're doing that alone.
Thank you. I think the principle in terms of plagiarising where possible is a good one, and principle to have overarching, but hopefully that addresses the specific area around that one. Madam Mayor.
Well, thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I did just in relation to that item write, and this is probably a question for Nikki, I wrote another workaround is what I wrote next to it, and I guess we've had this discussion before at this committee about whether we needed to make a similar investment as TDC are potentially going to have to make around our new financial model. So I just want to give Nikki the opportunity to perhaps reflect. It's probably 18 months since we've had this discussion, and there's an LTP, you know, that we'll start to prepare soon. So, you know, these systems are an investment in performance of the organisation. So I just want to test this again to see, have we at the point where we should start to put that on the list for consideration through the LTP. Because we seem to have to do an awful lot of workarounds and clip-ons and other things to get this to work. I'm not sure.
So through the chair, I mean, this is a very, very small aspect of a workaround, if you know what I mean. This is really, it's a minor dimension of what we're actually trying to capture. I mean, the key thing is that we have a contracts register, that we know what all our contracts are, we know when they're coming up for renewal, that they are being reviewed in a timely manner, all that sort of stuff. That's not really an accounting system function, so they're two quite separate issues. We were just trying to link them so that we could get a bit more control around making sure that people did update their contract register. I do believe there will be a point that we need to have a think about our accounting system, but I'm quite happy for TDC to go first on that.
All right, so just perhaps a follow-up question through you, Mr. Chair. So, given the opportunity, and I think back about the documents we've engaged in previously around shared service opportunities and other things, we want to remove as many barriers as possible. And would the accounting systems be a critical aspect of actually achieving some of the shared service opportunities? Would you see that as being one of the building blocks, or do you think it's a minor issue?
I think it's a minor issue. I mean, we've had the same accounting system for 15, 20 years now as TDC. We've both had the same accounting system. I think there are other opportunities that would add more value than sharing an accounting system. We've got quite different rating systems. We share information as much as possible within that finance space around processes and policies and things like that, but I don't think it's going to drive great benefits. Right, and I think the opportunities are elsewhere.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions for internal audit, business improvement? Madam Mayor.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Just one another question. I suppose it just comes back to Councillor Egger's questions around the asset register versus the asset management plans. And I just wonder, just to help me, when I come to the progress box and you talk about a project to complete an initial set of improvements relating to asset records and the parks facilities activities being initiated, can you just give me an example so I can understand a little bit more clearly what it is that you're actually focusing on here? Thanks, Arlene.
Through the chair, the work that's happening with the Parks and Facilities team at this point in time is about identifying gaps in data in their asset records. So an example would be whether they have proper process in place to ensure that condition assessment information, when that comes in, gets successfully updated into their asset records. So it's really looking at how we use our corporate asset management information system and how we might need to adapt that so that Parks and Facilities assets can be better incorporated. It wasn't originally set up for Parks and Facilities, so there's a little bit of work to do there. And this initial work in Parks and Facilities is based on building those foundations for asset or complete asset data in the records.
So follow-up question. So sort of on a 1 to 10 scale, and using condition assessments is a good one, so because they're critically important as we come into the AMP process. Sort of on a 1 to 10 scale, say in the Parks and Reserves area, 10 being everything's absolutely nailed, to 1 being we haven't really, it's very immature. Where are we on that spectrum? Roughly. Just the reason I'm asking is because it just means that I'll be mindful of this when I go through the asset management plan process.
Through the chair, I don't have information on that. I couldn't possibly give it a rating today. It's potentially a follow-up question for the Manager Parks and Facilities to deal to.
All right, well, Arlene, through you, Mr. Chair. Arlene, would you mind perhaps feeding that back through, just so that we can sort of have a sense check on that as we start to go through the asset management planning? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Further questions on the internal audit? No? If not, would somebody move that the internal audit quarterly progress report and its attachment be received. Thank you, Mr. Murray. Seconder for that. Councillor Sanson, thank you. Any further questions? If not,
Apologies, Mr. Chair, there was one more. Just going back, Lynn, through you, Mr. Chair, Ms. Lynn, you noted that you might have to backfill a spot there with the point of sale for founders. You talked about the point of sale when that's being delayed, and you may need to find something else to fill that space. But have you got something in mind?
Through the chair, I've only just been given that information today, so no, not right at this moment.
Right, but I'm sure you've got a list there that you can. You're not going to be left twiddling your thumbs with nothing to do. That's what I'm trying to imagine. Can't imagine that ever happening, but you do.
Through the chair, there's probably a number of areas that I could look at, but I can't give you specifically one right now.
Do you need any direction from the committee to do that, or is that something that you can self-select?
Self-select, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
yes, I mean, I think it would be useful to bring it back for us to have a look, or bring it back to me, you mean to, yeah, so the suggestion is that it comes back to me as the chair on that, and so I'll stay across that if you like. That would be good, thank you. Any further questions? If not, all those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried, thank you. New and outstanding significant risks. Lynn, while you're sitting there.
Okay, so again, for the benefit of new readers to this report, I just want to clarify what happens with these ones. So I will do audits and I will come up with these significant findings, and they will end up in this report. And so the first thing that appears in this report is my recommendation. Well, obviously, as you see in the first 4 columns. And then what happens in the progress are updates that I receive from the people who are responsible for ensuring that those actions are remedied to an acceptable level. So when I've got comments on here, I can quite likely answer your questions, but if they get into technical details, then I would need to take those away and find out the answers for you. So just clarifying that. And updates that I can give you. So with the second one, which is the water contamination prevention, the flowcharts that were to be done have been done, and so this will now be removed from the report, this particular overdue action, because it will reduce to medium, and in fact it may end up being closed fairly soon. We're just in discussions about that. And over the page, on page 14, the procurement and contract management in relation to NZS 3910. I just wanted to reiterate that our biggest risk is clearly through the capital projects contracts, and they are all visible through Clicky. So we do have a separate database for them. So when we're talking about the progress that's been made on getting together a centralised or well, actually I've got the wrong one, but they are visible through there. The legal issues in relation to developing NZS 3910 have been resolved, and what's happening at the moment is that the last tweaks and queries that the person who's doing the testing, who's very experienced in dealing with these particular contracts, he's just going through those, and then he's going to be training the rest of the users on it, and they're going to be put into production. So at that point it will get reduced to medium. So it's very, very close to that point. And that's pretty much it in terms of updates. So I'll take questions on that.
Thank you. Open up for questions. Councillor Edgar.
Yes, just in relation to earthquake-prone public buildings. So where does this stand within, so are they not sort of listed because they're not considered a significant risk, or because there's already a plan in place to deal with any public risk around earthquake-prone buildings, those who don't meet the NBS, 33%, 67, whatever?
Through the chair, this particular audit was simply to do with the water.
No, I'm just talking about
Yeah.
the whole document.
Right, so this isn't the risk document, this isn't council's risks and per se, it's only the risks that have been, significant risks that have been identified through internal audits. So certainly I haven't done an audit on council earthquake-prone buildings.
Other questions? Mr. Murray?
And hopefully you're pre-positioned for this question, but a wee while ago we had the Crowhorse report into procurement, and there were several recommendations coming out of that. I just lost sight of that. Have all of those been implemented?
Through the chair, you'll find that anything that's outstanding pretty much is sitting on here, unless maybe the group manager is aware of other things that weren't on there. Which particular Crowhorse report are you referring to?
Crowhorse did an internal audit into our procurement policy and procedures, which arose primarily out of members' interests stuff. But they identified several other areas for us to put attention onto, if I recall correctly. And when I was looking at this business improvement form, particularly around the contract procurement and management, I was sort of raised up in my mind as to had we actioned everything out of that report that we needed to. And it may have been answered previously, I just lost sight of it, but I was just wanting to get a bit of confirmation that we had implemented that report as far as possible.
So through the chair, as far as I'm aware, everything's been implemented. I can bring that back to the next committee. We have had some issues around members' interests and actually getting the disclosure from members about their family interests, because that was one of the recommendations. That's probably the main sort of outstanding, but we can't actually force that, so.
Madam Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and just saying Mr. Murray raised that, I was actually going through some paperwork the other day and I did come across this matter, and my recollection is that there were a couple of processes in play where there was to be some subsequent work undertaken. So the Crowhorse report came in, the matter then came back to governance, but at the same time it was part of a process, another process within a different committee. And I think it would be useful for us to bring it back, because I actually think there are some outstanding matters on that we just need to follow through. And I think now is the time to do it at the beginning of a triennium, because they do cross across the Members' Interest Act, and we want to make absolutely sure that we've got that, all of those processes in order. So I think that would be helpful if it could come back. I will provide through the chair to Nikki the documents that I've got that just caused me to trigger to know there was another step to go.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think that will be useful. I think Mr. Murray had his hand up first, and then Councillor Edgar.
Follow up on that? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Sorry, just when this came about, and you were talking about the family interests, just how was that quite determined? So, like, I mean, I have provided information, but, you know, I'm not quite sure how an interest of a 15-year-old child sits in some of these things versus someone who lives at home with their parents, and their parents' interest isn't relevant. So how was some of this determined?
My recollection of this is that it came out of, I think it was the 2017 Audit New Zealand report that made a suggestion that a consideration be given to the, I think they might have referred to it as best practice interest declarations, which included that level of disclosure. This was discussed, I think, at various times during the course of the last term. and it never landed on the side that it would be a requirement. Here, it would basically be left up to individuals, as I recall it. So that's where that landed.
Thank you.
Mr. Murray.
Yeah, just following on around procurement and contract management. I mean, this has been a topic which has been circulating around for some time now, and I suppose this dovetails slightly into the earlier question around reviewing just where we're at with internal audit function and what we're doing moving forward. And these reports are responding to some detail around our contract systems and our procurement systems. But I just wonder if it's not a point in time where we need to consider reviewing if our contract management and procurement policies and how we implement them are actually serving the organisation's needs as best as it can. There's been a lot of change and there's been a lot of detail in there, and I'm just wondering if a helicopter view out from the detail into, well, how is this actually working and are we getting the best outcomes from this system isn't a timely thing for perhaps in this review work that we're talking about. Now, I raise that because we see it here under business improvement and risks identified moving forward or key risk changes, and then when we read the audit letter later on, they raise other aspects of the contract management and procurement system as well, and it's sort of coming in from 3 or 4 different areas where perhaps, as I said, a helicopter view as to is it actually meeting our needs and do we need some further tweaks might be helpful. So I just put that as a suggestion moving forward. It's not actually a question for Lynn per se, although Arlene's now turned up again. So yeah, given it is a key risk to the organisation that we get this right and it's in our risk register, reflecting on it I think would be worthwhile.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Zach, do you want to comment on that?
Through the chair, I'll just provide you some assurance that there is a wealth of work happening internally to review and revise those procurement procedures and contract management procedures. So there is work happening on that to assess them and to make adjustments to them so that they're right-sized for the organisation and to make sure that we're getting the best outcomes.
Thank you.
That just leads me to ask, is it going to get reported back here as to what the scope of that review is and the findings and the outcomes, or is that just a complete sort of like management dealing with it type of question?
Through the chair, there will be a revised procurement policy. It's due for an update and that needs to come back through committees this year for review and approval.
Thank you. Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, and we've had some discussion about the need to review that policy. One of the things I think that will be quite important is that actually, rather than getting the output of that review, that actually as governors we have some input into what might be actually at a strategic level, what's important at a governance level as to what is in those documents. And I understand they operate internally, but as we've now established a tender subcommittee, we can already start to see some areas where there might be a lens that is important at a governance level that just may not be being picked up as much as we would like to see it in the actual procurement documents. And then we come to the next step of the tender evaluation processes. And if the key areas of tender evaluation are not aligned with the strategic direction of council, then I think we're missing some opportunities. So it's my request through you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chair, I wouldn't wish that upon you, is that we actually make sure that we timetable that just so that we can get all of council together with a bit of or the appropriate committee, which will be all of council, and a bit of framework around, okay, this is what the policy needs to do, this is where we're heading. Because it's becoming, I think it's going to be really important. It's a tool that is so important for achieving the strategic direction that we're seeking. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I agree that would be timely to do that.
So when do we see this?
Through the chair, we're aiming for the review and first approval by Audit and Risk in May.
Thank you. Just, yeah, Madam Mayor.
Sorry to be fairly conversational, but I think that's okay for this committee. I think in order to get what I'm talking about, that high-level governance thinking, that we're going to need to send that to some sort of workshop process just to go, this is what's going on, what is your thinking? And I think governance committee is probably the logical place just to have that discussion, Mr. Chair, but I'll leave that with you to consider, perhaps with Councillor Sanson, as to what the appropriate mechanism is. Thank you.
Any other questions? Just a quick observation from me, really directed to you, Lynn. Just notice a couple of places in here, for instance, the procurement and contract management, where it talks about is being tested, which will eventually include. It's actually quite handy to try to have some more specific timelines. There's a further one, I think, in the monitoring and management of contractor performance, where again there's commitments but no indication of timeframes. I mean, we can all understand if timeframes move or they shift, but creating an expectation up front, I think, is useful. So if those, where possible, can be included in the progress commentary, I think it would be useful. My other point comes back to in your introduction, you talked about the business continuity planning and that having dropped from high to medium and as a consequence being removed from the outstanding and significant risk exposures. I wonder, in terms of business continuity, where something like the coronavirus risk fits, recognising that the majority of the discussion around, or the discussion in the audit findings related pretty much to natural disaster. But I think we'd be deluding ourselves if we didn't think that the coronavirus might be an emerging potential risk for us. Appreciate there's not much we can do, but it'd be useful for this committee to know there is sight on it and where it might land in terms of a procedural place within this. And given the fact that the impact is likely to be significant for the community in terms of our ongoing ability to deliver essential services, I'd just like to know what might be there. So. You've got the magic answer for us, Malcolm.
I can give you an update on what we've done around this outbreak, which obviously occurred after these reports were approved. So, Mr. Chairman, yes, so regarding the coronavirus, we're regularly monitoring the Ministry of Health information on the outbreak. Keeping track of that, we're updating the senior leadership team weekly and getting their input into any actions that need to occur. We're reviewing our business continuity plans and specifically our pandemic side of that, and communicating with staff regarding best practice around prevention, hygiene, staying away if you're sick, the normal stuff that we usually do in the flu season, but we're just starting it earlier this year because of the coronavirus. I have the latest information from the Ministry of Health here. The risk that it will arrive in New Zealand, it's highly likely that it will arrive in New Zealand. That there will be some form of outbreak in New Zealand is also a high risk, but that it becomes a widespread outbreak, they're putting as a low to moderate risk for New Zealand, that it becomes widespread. However, we are planning accordingly and preparing for it if it does get here.
Thank you, that's useful to know. Has there been any activation or proposed activation or criteria for activation of the Regional Emergency Management Group, CDM group?
So they have been involved in the review of plans. I don't have any updates from them as to where they're at and the status of that, but we hope to have that in the next week or so from them.
Thank you. Any questions of Mr. Hughes while he's sitting at the table and on this topic? Madam Mayor.
Probably not questions, but just, we have got the emergency management process operating at the moment, so we are receiving regular situation reports. So there has been essentially the process have ticked into that, and we're getting regular updates on that. So at the moment, I'm quite satisfied with what I'm getting in terms of being able to see where we are for a region. I'll be going to, I'm sure, the Chief Executive as well, and the key members of the Civil Defence Emergency Management Group. So I think there is some reassurance that all the steps are in there. It's being fed through, and it's top of mind, both I'm sure for Pat, for the organisation, but also in my role as Mayor for the whole community.
Thank you, Chief Executive.
So we're also talking with our key contractors in terms of what their plans are to make sure that they can keep our essential systems running in the event of the coronavirus reaching here, to make sure that they've got the appropriate business continuity planning in place as well.
Thank you. Any further questions? If there isn't, would somebody move that the Audit and Risk Committee receives the new and outstanding significant risk exposure in its attachment? Madam Mayor, thank you. Councillor Sanson, thank you. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you, Ms Anderson. And we move to the key organisational risks report. And welcome Arlene back to the table in the hot seat. Over to you for any updates or highlights before I open up for questions. Exactly.
Thank you. Through the chair, I will just cover over some opening comments. Really to point out that the format and the content of this report has evolved over the last 12 to 15 months in line with feedback from the previous Audit, Risk and Finance Committee. And I'd like to give you my assurance that in working with this new iteration of the Audit and Risk Subcommittee, that I will be responsive to shaping format and content as it suits your up-to-date needs. And in terms of the risks themselves, this report is covering the time period July to December last year, and it's really just to summarise that in that time we've seen risk movement of 2 risk areas moving from high risk to medium risk, and 1 risk area moving from medium to low risk, and all other risks remain unchanged in terms of how we've assessed and rated those. And I'll take the report as read and any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Edgar.
Yeah, just a couple of questions. So, coming back to something I asked earlier, earthquake-prone public buildings. Probably sits in this area's report, not the previous one, but I didn't see it reflected in any of our organisational risks. I just also noted that in the risk areas, pages 19, 20, there actually is nothing, for the owners that falls under sport and rec or community services. Yet on page 22, community services group manager, does identify that, fire, for example, in the reserves. So I'm just wondering why earthquake-prone buildings and then also possibly fire risk on our reserves isn't reflected anywhere through our top 12. There's 12, risks.
Through the chair. So perhaps I can deal with the earthquake-prone council-owned buildings first. The risk report deals to organisational level risks that are considered things that could impact our ability as a whole organisation to deliver our services. My understanding, I'm not an expert in this area, but my understanding is that with earthquake-prone buildings, we have a policy in place, a number of assessments and repairs that would be happening in due course. I'm not aware of any significant risks that we would need to report on that area, and if they were, I would expect those to go to the relevant committee who has ownership of the assets. The second part of the question, I think, referred to fire risk. So this is discussed briefly by the Community Services Group, and the update was provided by Group Manager Roger Ball. And the steps that are in place at the moment for mitigating use of council reserves and the risk of fire there. Again, in terms of it being an overall risk that would have a big impact on our ability as an organisation to provide our core services, that's not featuring as significant at this point in time.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I mean, I feel there's a gap then, because you're saying it's dealt with under the committees. I don't see that reflected in the committee reports, and I don't see risk assessments coming through from them. And so therefore there's a gap. And so surely it would fall under audit and risk, because our ability to deliver as an organisation, yes, we need to look at the risks around that, but as a public organisation, we also have responsibilities back to the public on those services we deliver. So, you know, if I look at the, infrastructure, for example, the impact on us to deliver, if there is a, significant failure, we're not the only people who will be impacted if there, if a dam bursts, as a result of an earthquake, for example. It's not just about our ability to deliver, water, for example, to the public. There would be, flooding risk in other areas. So we can't quite discreetly isolate some of these things out and go, well, one belongs to us, one belongs to another area.
Is there a question coming through from the end of this? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Well, I'm asking about the gap.
Yeah.
And because the group committees aren't getting risk reports, so why is audit and risk sort of not identifying either the gap or monitoring all of the, broader risks other than just the organisational ones, because they're not discrete?
So I'll have a go at answering that. So the risks that are reported here, so each group has a risk register, and I think it's the top 10 risks get reported into this report. And what you also see is a timing delay. From the time this report is written and signed off, things change. So the fire risk has increased dramatically in the last 2 or 3 weeks. We have commented on it in paragraph 7.2. And as for the earthquake-prone buildings, that is literally an issue that has only just become apparent to me in the last 2 or 3 weeks. So it is something that we will be addressing through the Community Services Group, and very quickly. And most likely it will feature in that equivalent of paragraph 7.2 next time. And if it got high enough and displaced one of the other major risks, then it would appear in the heat map. But I am fairly confident that by the time that the next meeting of this committee, we will have managed that risk, and it'll be down to a lower level very quickly.
Thank you, Chief Executive. I'll respond to that as well, but Councillor Sanson, you wanted to make a comment in this space as well? Or ask a question?
I think Pat's covered off mine.
Okay.
I think Pat has covered off. Mine was really, I felt that Councillor Edgar was getting at kind of liability risk, and I couldn't really see where that is featuring in any of our reports. So my question as a new member of this committee was, where do we see that? When's that? How does that come to us?
Thank you, Councillor Sanson. And I think my response was going to be along the same lines, that as new members, you have not yet had the benefit of seeing how it goes. I have seen the full risk register of this organisation, and it's that thick of A3 pages. So the challenge is the distillation of that and the escalation of it to what are the top the top items. The plans that we're working on, well, I think are planned for this this next period about the refinement of the risk management procedure are all about, you know, how we hone that down and how we do it. But I can understand, knowing the full system, why those have not yet come through to the top, or indeed whether they will in relation to the others, because there are a number of potential liabilities, potential risks that the organisation faces. They can't all be on the top 10. So it's just a question of where and how they bubble through in the system, and that's got to be a judgment through the process, through the system.
I guess if I look, for example, and it's one that I did have a question on, which I sent through earlier, was just if I look at infrastructure, I mean, literally everything is in here, you know, right down to, you know, the waste management and minimisation plan. And so it does seem, you know, that entire, you know, work areas, like all of infrastructure is in here, but yet sort of, you know, parks, reserves, community services isn't, and because there is minutiae within infrastructure as well. So I guess it's hard to see how some areas are distilled and others aren't. But the question I actually sent through on infrastructure was just around managing the risk. And what I saw under the managing the risk was what I would call business as usual, rather than an enhancement or a review. So, I mean, if it is just business as usual, you know, 30-year infrastructure strategy, AMPs, etc., I mean, that's all, we legally have to do all those things. So how does that make it, I guess, an elevated risk if business as usual is what manages it?
Through the chair, the columns on the left-hand side where we talk about managing the risk and the control. So yes, correct that some of those are legally required things that we have to do, but we do consider those as controls for the risks. So many of our controls around making sure that the risk remains at the level that it is, or what we're doing to contain it, do often fall into processes that we have in place. On the right-hand side of the table in the treatments and what we're planning are the things that we need to improve or do differently to add an additional level of control to make sure that the risks don't escalate.
Thank you. So I was going to respond along those lines in terms of the full thing. So thank you, Zach, on that. Are there any other questions in relation to that item or this report? Madam Mayor?
Mr. Chair, I'm just sort of wondering if there's a way to sort of approach the follow on from Councillor Egar's sort of questions around essentially how does something get to this point. And I think it's we have to watch this run through a few times till you see them move around. But essentially what I would expect is that when it comes to earthquake prone buildings, that there is a register for this organisation, and there will be a management plan in place to manage the highest risks, and that will be an active process. I think the questions that we may want to have as a committee are at some point just making sure that some of those, just rounding back to go, are some of those established management, methodologies actually working as intended. So I think, that might be just something we want to contemplate as we go through thinking what our work program might be for the year, is to go, is there something that we need to turn our mind to in relation to earthquake prone buildings are nothing new. They've, we should be, what shouldn't be a council in New Zealand that's not acutely aware of earthquake prone buildings and having a robust management plan in place for dealing with them. So I think we just sort of maybe we need to think about whether there's a check-in process around some of those long-standing established issues, just to make sure that, the management processes are as robust as we need them to be. Because they certainly, having been through a process of having to close an earthquake-prone building, a public building, at short notice, and the public disruption that that causes, we understand the risks around that and we should have them well managed. So I think it's just a reflection for us perhaps as we go through the year.
Thank you, and I think what it raises for me is the way that we function on this, and as the Chief Executive has said, as Ms Acklick has said, is these represent the top 10. Particularly with new members, there will be questions around where does this fit in. I think it's perfectly okay to ask a question and say where is that, without necessarily the expectation that because it's in the top 10, it's not being attended to. As I say, it's a very, very big list. So I certainly encourage that questions are asked about such things as that. And if there is Councillor Edgar's raised a question around earthquake buildings, is there a register and so on? And that's information that I think would be useful to bring back in the next report, just to highlight that particular question. Councillor Sanson.
Thank you through the chair, and this is just another question in general around on this topic really. And the risk register, do we have a duty of care, I guess, to disclose information around, new information around earthquake-prone buildings to the community? Is that is that covered off in this committee or register?
My response on this is a public meeting. This risk register is in the public environment, and there are very few risks that I can recall that have been carried through to public excluded. So I think there is an attitude of openness and awareness on that. Do we publish every register in that big document I was talking about? No, because that's information at a management level that is worked out at a departmental level as to what they consider their risks, and obviously what's a big risk to one part of the organisation may not be so for another, and therefore may not be an organisational one. Doesn't alter the fact it might be significant to that department. But that's what we rely on the risk management process, the Chief Executive and the senior leadership team to be able to bring those together and escalate those significant ones to us here in the public forum. Yes, Chief Executive.
But yes, I think we have a duty of care to the people who use our public buildings, yes.
Okay, would somebody move that the key organisational risk report be received with its attachment? Mr Murray will, thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sanson. Is there any further questions on that? If not, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you, Eileen. Again, for the benefit of new members, this is a format that has also been evolved over the last term to this level of detail and sophistication. And just echoing something that Ms Acklick did say was that as we move through, we've had a practice of if we've seen a beneficial change to the format or to the reporting content that as a committee we thought would be useful, we've made a request for that to come through of officers, and I have to say the response generally in that has been excellent in terms of getting the reports evolving on an ongoing basis. So that stays open. If you can think of a better way of doing it or an enhanced way of doing it, feel free to suggest that happens. Malcolm, over to you. Updates, issues of emphasis.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Well, first I've got a brief update on the previous question about the earthquake-prone buildings, that it's actually a requirement under the earthquake-prone buildings legislation to put notices on such buildings, and I do know that they are on some of the earthquake-prone buildings. I have checked on one of them that I was interested in.
I've already provided the update on the coronavirus, so I don't do that now. And the only other update I have is, it mentions in the report that there's a security review at libraries underway, will be upcoming. It's actually underway today. I've been meeting with them this morning over at the library, so that's the only updates I have.
Thank you. I open it up for questions, Mr. Hughes. Councillor Edgar?
Yeah, just in relation to the incidents of note, what I would have anticipated to see only for the incidents of note, not for every scraped knee or, paper cut, is actually a little more detail around what happened, how did we respond, what could or should have been done differently, what new measures maybe need to be put in place, if any, to reduce the risk of reoccurrence, and then any follow-up or investigations taking place. And I just didn't feel that the information we got, albeit it's spread over different areas, actually gave me that confidence. So for example, it's not mentioned in the body of the report, but bottom of page 49, it talks about a disoriented person driving in a crowded Isle Park during the Bloom Festival. So that's the entire line. I don't know, what's being done. It was classified as a near miss. So, what's being done differently to reduce such incidents, because we know that events and activities take place at Isle Park all the time. So for those incidents of note, I expect to be seeing, what changes, if any, are we putting in place. So the unfortunate fatality, I take it that it was a natural event, so there was probably no difference, nothing that could have avoided it. But yeah, in regards to, like the disoriented person driving in a crowd at Isle Park, obviously there was enough vehicle access to enable that to happen. So I would like to be seeing what are we doing differently to mitigate, reduce that risk.
Did you want to comment on that now, Ms. Hughes, or just take that as a pointer for going forward? Is there anything you can add to that particular one?
Through the Chair, I can answer specific questions on those incidents if required at this point. I will note that I do add detail on the incidents that I find particularly significant, but I'll bear that in mind and try and add more detail to those ones. I guess in the main report, where the ones under incidents of note there are the ones that I found to be a particular note and have added the detail. That as a near miss, it's simply because it appears in the data is why I've referred to what the incident was that appeared in the data. There was controls put in place on access for future events, but I didn't see that as something significant enough to require reporting at this governance level.
Yeah, I think for incidents of note that we do need to know controls are being put in place to reduce any further incidences.
Okay, thank you. I think that point's noted. Mr. Murray.
Thank you. Thank you for your report again, Mr. Hughes. Just a couple of questions in addition to your report that I'd like to add. Anyway, look, the hard stands appeared 4.2.3. We've had an unfortunate incident where someone's fallen off the ladder, and there has been some controls implemented there to try to mitigate that risk. I just wondered if that investigation or that piece of work on the hard stand, if it actually then went on to consider the wider risks of operation of the hard stand. So people have often got things like solvents, there's sandpapering stuff, there's dust in the air, all that sort of stuff, which perhaps we've got no context on as to whether they're risks that we need to be concerned about, and or what is in place to protect the all-round situation. So that was a question around the marina. Do you want them all, or just? Yep. Through the Chair,
So with the hard stand incident, it's a good point. There is a number of risks at the hard stand, both environmental risks from the dusts and solvents and health and safety risks. The challenge there is that it's not actually our work. It's the boat owners' work on their vessels. It is our site, so we have responsibilities, but our influence and control is a challenging matter. And so we're improving our monitoring of what they're doing. We're improving, they already have conditions that they sign into that covered most of these things, but we're enforcing them a lot better and coming up with some ways to make that work. We're frantically trying to better control access to the hard stand so we know who's there and so they are only there more when we monitor it. But sometimes that gets into conflict with boat owners wanting to do their own work on the weekends and our staff, no, our contractor staff aren't there to monitor what's going on. So there's a number of things going on there and yeah, we are, it is part of the wider thing that's considered, even though not directly relevant to this incident.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just before we move on, the Chief Executive would like to comment on that as well.
So what this incident highlighted to me was that we're not exerting enough control as landowner, and that's what we're taking steps to address at the moment, so that we take more responsibility for the land that we own, and for health and safety standards, but also for environmental standards, that if someone's sanding and that dust is getting in the air, it's also landing on the asphalt, and is it getting into the environment? There's a whole lot of big questions that we're paying a lot more attention to the marina than we were, say, 6 to 9 months ago, and will be for some time yet.
Excellent. Thank you.
Good to hear. Mr. Murray.
So 4.5, we talk about the due diligence activities, which is highlighted further in the report on page 53. Our previous discussion around this was around governance engaging with the health and safety process, which is the purpose of it. And previous meetings, we've sort of talked about having councillors and members scheduled for site visits and put into their diary. And of course now what's happened is we do have a new council and new committees and new chairs and new people. Just wondered if that has actually happened for the new trade-on for people in terms of governors integrating with the health and safety system and going out and doing site visits so they can understand the action of the health and safety, and also demonstrating their cultural, not as in ethical, cultural as in the organisation's cultural approach towards health and safety, which is, it's very important.
Through the chair, so my understanding is there is a couple of site visits for councillors planned, and I've been speaking to people involved in organising this and requested that I have some input, or perhaps provide some questions that can be asked that will help address this and give them a better understanding of health and safety.
Thank you. Just before we move off that topic, I'd just like to record at Councillor Noonan's request that she actually did attend the Maitai Bridge for those purposes, Maitai Bridge construction for those purposes. So if that could be recorded, I think she would appreciate that. Mr. Murray.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, which leads on nicely to my final point. The senior leadership due diligence list, I'd like for you to add that myself and Mr. Lavertis and Mr. Gorman, with our forestry advisory group hat on, went on a skid site visit on the 10th of September up on the Fringed Hill, where we took great interest and note of the health and safety procedures operating within our forestry operation. So that should be added as well. But I think the point is that one, it's important these lists are accurate because they will at some stage get called in terms of who's done what at the governance level, and also it's fundamentally important that governors do integrate with the operation of the organisation.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Question, Madam Mayor.
Look, just on the same point, I had some diary appointments that came through about site visits out to water treatment plants and other things, and sent back a note to say, look, could we please incorporate, really start to get on incorporating some health and safety visits when we've got those opportunities and got people off site, making sure whether it's on the way, doing something else, because I just don't actually think, Malcolm, apologies, but I really just don't think this is getting enough priority. We need to make absolutely sure that we have that they are top of mind for every elected member, and we need to have them in the diary, and that should be, as part of the induction process, really should have been right at, at the top of the list for governance advisors to be going, right, what are the most important things that need to be done? Actually, we need to have these health and safety on-site assessments done. We've got a policy that says we need to do, I think, 3 or 4 a year. I don't think we're conforming with our policy, so I'd really like us to make a step change this year. And just really think carefully about when we're out, what's going on, how we can incorporate them. Even within this building, there is work that goes on a fairly regular basis. This chamber's had, people up letters and wires hanging down and notices on the door and all sorts of things all through January. And I did at one point think I better go, Malcolm, about time we'll do an hour and we'll do a health and safety inspection in here. But really they need to be timetabled. So perhaps we could just, maybe at the next meeting, just because I do think it's so important, can we please get a report back to so we know that it's been done.
Thank you. Chief Executive.
Can I also suggest that don't just get distracted on the big capital projects. The real risks is in our day-to-day operations, swimming pools, mowing grass, cutting down a branch of a tree. Those are the areas where you really have to pay attention the whole time, and it's much easier to get lax. Well, not lax, but an independent set of eyes can really be valuable sometimes. Why are you doing it that way? It's always a very good question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Any further questions, Mr. Hughes, on the Health, Safety and Wellbeing report? Would somebody move that we thank you, Councillor Edgar, thank you, Councillor Sanson. Any further questions? If not, all in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Motion's carried. Move to the final item in this agenda, which is the letter from Audit New Zealand on the annual report for the year ending 30th of June 2019. Over to you, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the audit report came through in January. It's quite a few pages and there's quite a few items that they've commented on. I've highlighted our responses in yellow and happy to take any questions.
As I said at the outset, I think this is it's a good report in terms of what it says about the organisation and the people who run it. And it's good to see those responses highlighted like that. Helps to highlight them. So thank you for that, Ms. Harrison. Any specific points people would like to raise? Just on item 4.3, it's page 75 of the total pack. The GST audit, GST compliance, recommending that we implement the action plan. That report was presented to us in August 2019. Will we get a sort of up-to-date closure on that at some stage, just to let us know that all of those have been done at some future report, Ms. Harrison, just to tick off that it's a little bit like the Crow Horse report. It's handy for us to know that these things have been actioned.
Yes, through the chair, that's a good idea. Through the annual tax, we do an annual tax review, and through that we will be bringing up the audits that have been done this year, the tax audits, and so we'll just close off the prior year action so it's clear that they've been actioned. Thank you,
as long as we have that closed off. No questions for that? Would somebody move that the subcommittee receive the report and note that Audit New Zealand responses on the annual report for the 30th of June. Thank you, Councillor Edgar. Again, thank you, Councillor Sanson. Any further discussion or questions? Not all those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. I would ask now that somebody move that we exclude the public and go into the public excluded part of this meeting for the reasons stated on page 5 and 6. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Sanson. Do I have a seconder? Madam Mayor, thank you. All those in favour, please, aye. Against? Carried. Thank you.